Title: ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The man who wouldn't break. Smash that like button before it disappears into the dark. Subscribe if you dare, and comment below what you'd do if you spent one day inside the world's most dangerous prison. Welcome to ADX Florence, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. It started on a snow-choked highway just outside of Denver. The sky was a dull slate, and the wind carried whispers from the mountains. A black convoy of armored vehicles tore through the silence, engines growling like beasts in chains. Inside the middle truck sat Marcus Holloway, once the ruthless leader of one of the most feared gangs in Chicago, now shackled and silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. He had ruled the streets for over a decade. His rise was meteoric: money, power, fear, all earned through the kind of brutality that made news anchors stutter. But when a drug deal gone wrong left 2 undercover agents dead, Marcus's empire crumbled overnight. Betrayed by his own second-in-command, he was captured in a sting operation that left blood on the concrete and headlines across the nation. Now the government wanted him gone, not dead, but forgotten. And there was only one place suited for that: ADX Florence, the most secure federal prison in America. Known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, ADX was a fortress buried deep in Colorado's heart. Here, inmates didn't just serve time, they vanished. Its walls had seen the likes of terrorists, serial killers, and the masterminds behind organized crime. But none had ever escaped, and few had survived with their minds intact. As the gates loomed ahead, tall, gray, and lifeless, Marcus smirked. "You can cage a man," he muttered under his breath, "but you can't cage a king." The officers didn't respond. They'd heard it all before. Inside ADX, the air was colder, thinner. Every sound, from the hum of fluorescent lights to the shuffle of boots, carried a metallic echo that clawed at the nerves. Marcus was stripped, searched, and led through a maze of concrete corridors. The walls seemed to close in with every step. "Cell 23, barked a guard. "This is your world now." The cell was 8 by 10 feet, just enough room for a steel toilet, a concrete bed, and a slit of a window facing a concrete wall. 23 hours a day of solitude, 1 hour in a concrete pit for recreation. No contact, no noise, no mercy. For weeks, Marcus said nothing. The silence gnawed at him, but he fought it. He counted the cracks in the walls, recited his old codes, replayed every betrayal. Especially one name: Rico. The man who'd handed him over to the feds. The one who'd promised brotherhood, then sold him out for immunity. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man who stayed broken for long. Rumors started to spread, whispered through air vents, passed through coded messages in laundry bags. Somehow, even in isolation, Marcus began to rebuild his network. The guards noticed strange things. Inmates who had no way of communicating seemed to act in sync. Lunch trays were stacked in peculiar patterns. The flicker of a cell light at exactly the same time each night. It was almost as if someone was orchestrating movement from the shadows. Someone who had found a way to turn the silent walls of ADX into his own empire. By the 3rd month, the warden called an emergency meeting. "We've got a ghost," he said grimly. "Someone's pulling strings from inside a concrete box." When they traced the patterns, the hidden codes, the altered meal rotations, the smuggled notes, they all led to Cell 23. Marcus Holloway had done the impossible. He was running influence inside the most secure prison in the world. But one night, during a routine check, a guard stopped at his cell and froze. The tray slot was open, the food untouched. Marcus was sitting perfectly still, staring at the wall, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. "What are you looking at?" the guard asked. Marcus smiled faintly. "Freedom," he whispered. The guard frowned, turning to leave, but then noticed something etched into the wall. Just 3 words, carved deep with a stolen utensil. Rico was here. The discovery sent a chill through the entire facility. Rico had never been processed into ADX. He was dead, killed 2 years earlier in a drive-by. But somehow, his name had reappeared, and Marcus had gone silent again. Something had followed him into that cell, or maybe something was still waiting for him to come undone. And as the lights dimmed that night, One question echoed down the corridors of ADX Florence. How do you break a man who's already broken the system? The ghost in cell 23. The snow outside ADX Florence fell in sheets that morning, erasing any trace of the world beyond its steel gates. Inside, everything was routine: head counts, searches, silence. But deep in D Block, the tension was no longer invisible. Everyone, guards, wardens, even the lifers, felt it. Something about Marcus Holloway had changed. He no longer spoke, no longer moved much, yet his presence filled every hallway. Guards said he had a way of looking through you, that when his eyes met yours, you felt your own secrets clawing their way out. Others said it was just paranoia. ADX had that effect on people. Isolation stripped a man bare, left him with nothing but the sound of his own breathing and the weight of his thoughts. But Marcus wasn't just another inmate losing his mind. The prison logs began to show patterns no one could explain. Security cameras flickered near his block, only for a few seconds, but always between 2 o'clock and 2:03 a.m. The night shift guards would hear tapping through the vents, too rhythmic to be random. And every morning, small details changed. Food trays rearranged, security doors left slightly ajar, or coded messages appearing in places no one could reach. When the FBI's Internal Prison Division got wind of it, they sent in Special Agent Lucas Brandt, a man with a reputation for seeing through chaos. Brandt had investigated everything from cartel tunnels to hacker collectives. But this was different. He sat across from the warden in the surveillance room, eyes fixed on the frozen image of Marcus in his cell. "He hasn't said a word in 31 days, the warden said. "But I swear to God, he's running something in there." Brandt leaned closer to the monitor. Marcus was staring at the wall, lips moving silently. "Can you zoom in?" The feed crackled. The focus sharpened just enough to reveal faint letters carved beside Marcus's head. "We never left." Brandt frowned. "What does that mean?" The warden shifted. "You tell me." That night, Brandt ordered a full cell inspection. Every inch of cell 23 was combed through: walls, vents, even the toilet pipes. But all they found was a single folded piece of paper wedged behind a loose tile. It wasn't written in ink, but in something darker, ash mixed with water. The message read, "Every man in here eats the same, but not everyone tastes the same thing." Brandt didn't understand it. Not yet. In the cafeteria, inmates whispered stories about Marcus, how he was communicating through the food trays, sending coded messages by refusing certain items. The kitchen staff denied everything, but one worker, a quiet man named Ellis, went missing 2 weeks later. His ID badge was found near the incinerator. The warden tried to lock it down, but rumors spread faster than chains could rattle. Some inmates swore Marcus had learned how to move things, messages, favors, even fear, through the smallest cracks in routine. His silence had become his weapon. Brandt visited Marcus's cell on the 12th day of the investigation. The guard opened the steel door and stepped aside. The cell was freezing, colder than the others, as if it had swallowed the mountain air itself. Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor, hands resting on his knees. He didn't look up when Brandt entered. "You're making a lot of noise for a man who doesn't talk," Brandt said. Marcus smiled faintly, still staring at the wall. "Noise is just silence with attention," he murmured. Brandt studied him. "What's with the carvings? The notes? The missing kitchen staff?" Marcus finally lifted his eyes. They were tired, but steady. "You think ADX breaks men, Agent Brandt. But that's the lie they tell the public. ADX doesn't break men. It buries them alive, and listens to who still screams the loudest." "Then who's screaming now?" Brandt asked quietly. Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Not me." The cell intercom buzzed suddenly. The warden's voice crackled through. "Agent Brandt, you need to come to the control room. Now." When Brandt arrived, the color drained from his face. On the central monitor, the live feed from the kitchen flickered, showing every tray neatly stacked in rows, except one. On that tray, spelled out with mashed potatoes and beans, were the words, "He's not alone." The room went dead silent. Brandt turned to the warden. Who's assigned to that meal rotation? Ellis, the warden said, his voice trembling. The man who disappeared. Brant stared at the screen. The camera froze for a second, and when it came back, the message on the tray was gone. Marcus Holloway sat quietly in his cell, humming an old blues song that no one else should have known. Whatever had started in cell 23, it was spreading. And by the next morning, another guard would vanish without a trace. The man who outlived the walls. By dawn, the temperature in Florence, Colorado had dropped below freezing, but inside ADX, the air felt even colder. The entire facility was in partial lockdown. No inmate movement, no kitchen rotations, no contact beyond essential staff. The guard who vanished overnight was named Miller, 26 years old, 3 years on the job, and by all accounts, clean. He had last been seen walking toward D Block, near Marcus Holloway's cell. When they checked the cameras, the feed jumped exactly 4 minutes of static, and then came back to show the hallway empty. Miller was gone. Agent Lucas Brant hadn't slept. His coffee had gone cold hours ago as he sat in the surveillance room, staring at looping footage of flickering corridors and unblinking lenses. Something about the timing gnawed at him. 2 to 2:03 a.m., always. The same window, the same dead silence. He turned to the warden. Cut power to D Block. All of it. I want to see what he does when he can't see himself. The warden hesitated. You can't just. Brant snapped. Do it. The lights in D Block died with a metallic thunk. For a moment, the mountain itself seemed to exhale. Guards watched from thermal monitors, each glowing outline of a prisoner barely moving. But one shape, in cell 23, stood perfectly still, upright, facing the wall. Then in the darkness, something new appeared on the feed. Faint glowing letters written across the wall in Marcus Holloway's cell. You built this place to hold monsters. You forgot it teaches men to become one. Brant froze. Is that? Before he could finish, the letters vanished. The feed blurred, flickered, and returned to normal lighting as backup power kicked in. Marcus was sitting again, his eyes open, calm. Brant stormed to the cell. The heavy door opened with a screech that echoed through the block. Marcus didn't flinch. Where's Miller? Brant demanded. Marcus smiled faintly. He's still here. Just not where you're looking. Brant slammed his hands on the table. Enough riddles. You're orchestrating something inside this place. Messages, missing men, coded food trays. What's the endgame? Marcus leaned forward, the fluorescent lights casting half his face in shadow. You think ADX Florence is about control, about keeping chaos locked away. But it's not. It's about observation. They watch us, we watch them. Eventually, the walls start keeping score. Brant's jaw tightened. That doesn't explain the bodies. Marcus's gaze dropped to the floor. Bodies are just stories that got too loud. Before Brant could respond, a distant alarm wailed. Not one of the standard alerts, but a deep, pulsing tone that hadn't been used since the prison opened. Guards sprinted down the hallway. Someone shouted from the control room. All systems are down. Doors are disengaging. Brant's radio crackled with static. Then a voice, faint, distorted, whispered. Cell 23 is open. He turned back to Marcus, but the chair was empty. Brant stumbled backward. How? The warden's voice shouted through his earpiece. We have eyes on D Block. He's still there, he hasn't moved. Brant ran to the monitors. The cameras showed Marcus sitting in his cell exactly as before, calm, silent, unshackled. But standing directly behind him was another figure, blurry, almost transparent, wearing a guard's uniform. Miller. The image flickered once more, then went black. For the next 11 minutes, ADX Florence went completely dark. No lights, no comms, no visibility. When power returned, everything was as it had been, except cell 23 was empty. No sign of Marcus Holloway. No broken locks. No forced doors. Nothing. The only clue left behind was a scrap of paper taped to the inside of the cell door. On it, written in the same ashen water ink, were the words, "You can't cage silence." A week later, a letter arrived at the Denver field office addressed to Agent Lucas Brant. No return address. Inside was a single photo, grainy, low light, clearly taken from an old surveillance camera. It showed a diner somewhere off a lonely Colorado highway. In the corner booth, a man in a hooded sweatshirt stirred his coffee, head tilted down. The side of his face was visible only enough to show the hint of a scar, the same one Marcus had across his cheek. On the back of the photo, a message: "You built ADX to break men. I built myself to survive it." Brant stared at it for a long time, the sound of the warden's words replaying in his mind. Nobody escapes Florence. And yet, somehow one man had. Weeks later, during a random audit, the FBI discovered something stranger. Every recording, every file connected to Marcus Holloway had been wiped clean. Not deleted, but replaced. Each file name was now the same word, repeated hundreds of times. Silence. The investigation was officially closed 2 months later. The warden transferred out quietly. Brant requested reassignment to counterintelligence. But every so often, late at night, a new case would land on his desk, a disappearance here, a locked room anomaly there. And somewhere in the static of the surveillance footage, a faint whisper would echo through the speakers. "You can lock the doors, Agent Brant, but you'll never stop what listens from inside." And in that moment, even he began to wonder. Maybe ADX Florence didn't just break men. Maybe it made something else entirely. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for what comes next. Subscribe and don't look away.